What is the worst wedding ceremony you attended? There were no tables and chairs. Like none. They had an open bar, but no fucking chairs. Everyone had to put their drink on the ground and hold their plate to eat. It was fucking crazy. Everyone just assumed that some sort of terrible thing happened where the tables and chair people didn't bring them. But afterwards I asked her, the bride, what happened, and she just said, "Oh, we would have had to pay extra for that."
That sounds wild. Can't believe they skimped on the essentials for a wedding. Open bar is nice, but no tables or chairs. Makes eating and drinking a challenge. The bride's response is pretty casual about it too. Guess she prioritized saving some cash over comfort. Everyone must have been confused at first. Just imagine the scene with everyone crouched down or standing around, trying to enjoy the day.
I was at a wedding 2 years ago where the happy couple-to-be were also best friends with another married couple, so naturally made the other couple best man and maid of honor. 3 weeks before the wedding, the other couple ended dramatically through him cheating and were going through a nasty divorce by the time the wedding rolled around. The whole wedding became centered around the best man and maid of honor and their dismal attempt at looking happy for the new couple. The best man even had his new girlfriend rock up at the reception. Awkward as fuck, but there was definitely a sense of all the guests as to OMG, what's gonna happen next?
That sounds like a tough situation. Weddings are supposed to be about love, but when drama from outside comes in, it really shifts the focus. You could feel the tension in the air, with everyone quietly wondering how the best man and maid of honor would handle it. It's wild to think how relationships can change so quickly, especially right before such a big event. Definitely a memorable wedding for the guests, for sure.
My cousin's wedding. Cousin and husband live about 3 hours away from his and her respective families. Everyone gets to the reception and finds out there is no dinner, only hors d'oeuvre. And by that, I mean there was a tray of cold meatballs, cold mozzarella sticks, and 2 turkeys for around 120 people. Half the guests left for about an hour to go get something to eat. Cash bar was crazy expensive, like $6 for a bottle of Miller Lite. Then, they start selling dances with the bride and groom for $50. Sadly, I saw people finding the envelope of cash they were giving as a gift and taking money out. Edit. Spelling edit too. Yes, this was a real wedding, not a strip club.
Sounds like a memorable wedding. I guess cold hors d'oeuvres weren't what everyone expected. It's wild how half the guests just dipped to grab food. Charging for dances is a surprising move too. And seeing people take money from the envelope is just low. Really makes you question the whole vibe of the day. Not what you picture when you think of a wedding celebration. Definitely a night to remember though.
As a waitress, I've seen a lot of shit at weddings. Amongst my favorite, the best man who got up and started his speech, retelling all the details of the Bucks night. The bride's family had flown in from Africa, unsure of the nation. They were all in traditional dress, and we were only serving alcohol to certain tables because of their religious beliefs, I guess. The poor bride was hiding her head in her hands while the best man talks about the groom climbing on stage at a strip joint and eating a banana out of the stripper. Rule number 1 of giving speeches at weddings: never retell Bucks night stories. Edit. Words suit for shit. Obviously, I think faster than I type.
That sounds like a rough situation for the bride. It's always a gamble with wedding speeches. I've seen my fair share of awkward moments too. People get a little carried away when they have a microphone in their hand. The best man probably meant well, but some things shouldn't be shared in front of everyone's family. It's tough when personal stories clash with the occasion's vibe. Just a tiny reminder to keep it classy next time.
I once attended a wedding of a couple that objected to Vatican II. They didn't believe in doing the service in the vernacular, so the entire service was in Latin for 4 hours. 2 to 3 hours, I could have been fine with that if it wasn't for 2 reasons. 1, it was in winter and the church didn't have heat. Everyone was freezing too. After the wedding, the The bride freaked out and had an annulment TLDR. I sat through a wedding in Latin for 4 hours in winter with no heat, and the bride called the whole thing off immediately afterward. Edit. Look up Solemn High Traditional Catholic Latin Mass Wedding on YouTube, and you'll have an idea of what the service was like. Looking through them, I must have been mistaken. It was probably closer to 2 to 3 hours, not 4.
Sounds like a long and pretty chilly experience. I've heard of those Latin services being intense, but without heat in winter? That's rough. And then the bride calling for an annulment right after really adds a twist. I guess that wedding wasn't what anyone expected, huh? Sometimes you just sit through things and wonder how they'll turn out in the end.
I went to a Mormon wedding ceremony, and everything about it was strange. The pastor unraveled this crazy long scroll and claimed to have family, tree tying him back to Adam. Then randomly picked a young man in the audience to start the ceremony with a prayer. The guy looked around and said, "Who, me?" It was so wheels off.
That sounds like quite the experience. It's interesting how different ceremonies can be so unique. I remember attending a wedding where the officiant was really unconventional too. They made jokes throughout the ceremony, which was unexpected. It kind of shifted the vibe from serious to relaxed. Sometimes, those unusual moments stick with you more than the traditional ones.
One was in Atlanta in the middle of the summer, and the venue had no AC and not enough chairs, so we ended up standing for the entire "wives must serve and obey their husbands" type ceremony. After that, we go to the reception, which was dry, and it was a buffet, but with servers serving the food. I go up with my dinner plate, and there was a meatball station with 2 types of meatballs. You got to pick one type, and then the server asked if you wanted 1 or 2. Think tiny cocktail meatballs, not big-ass meatballs. Next was the veggie station, where I had my choice of 1 or 2 asparagus spears. There was no dancing or anything either. People ate their 2 meatballs and left. It was brutal.
Sounds like a rough time. No AC in summer is already a struggle. Standing through that kind of ceremony can be annoying. Then the reception just adds to it. A dry buffet with tiny meatballs and asparagus sounds pretty dull. It's wild how some events just don't hit the mark. Everyone just ate their food and left? Kind of a letdown for what should have been a fun time.
I went to a church wedding in Korea. I had been to other Korean weddings and knew that most people just show up to drop off their gift, money, and then hit the buffet, and attending the actual wedding ceremony isn't really required/expected for most guests. What surprised me about this one was sitting in the church for the actual ceremony and how nobody who even came in was paying attention. Everyone was on their iPads or smartphones. I saw lots of people just playing Angry Birds. This was 3 years ago, and a few just full on having phone conversations during the ceremony. Just blew my mind. These weren't children. These were middle-aged adults. Why even go inside if you were just going to text message or play cell phone games?
I get that. It's like people just want to show their face but don't care about the actual event. It's pretty wild seeing adults tuning out in a place that's supposed to be meaningful. I guess the buffet is the real highlight for many. Still, it's strange that so many wouldn't at least try to pay attention, even for a bit. Makes you wonder about the whole idea of being present at events these days.
My father was best man at a wedding once. Beautiful ceremony. Bride is the last one of her family to get married. Her father is swelling with pride and clearly the happiest person in the world. Shortly into the reception, he has a heart attack. My mother, the maid of honor and a nurse practitioner, goes along with the ambulance doing CPR all the way while the bride's mother pulls my father and the groom aside and insists that the celebration would continue and it would be a happy day. Could be worse ways to go out, I guess, though. And my father ended up throwing out his prepared best man speech. Somehow, he didn't seem to think it would cut it anymore.
That sounds intense. I've seen some weddings go off the rails, but this one really takes the cake. The mix of joy and tragedy is something you rarely see. It's wild how people try to keep things going despite chaos. Your father must have felt odd about his speech after that. It's a strange moment to celebrate while someone's life is hanging in the balance. Glad to hear everyone eventually pulled through.
Outside wedding in Central California during summer. It was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Shitty music. No open bar. Maid of honor, bride's sister, gave a really long and dumb speech in her Valley Girl talk. Every sentence had that high cadence at the end, and that kind of drags out the last word. Sort of like, I can't believe you found such a great guai. I'm so proud of you. This is a beautiful day. Blah, 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 blah.
That sounds like a rough time. Outdoor weddings can be too hot sometimes, especially in summer. The music can really kill the vibe if it's not right. No open bar is just a letdown for everyone. The maid of honor's speech must have felt endless with that style of talking. It's like she was trying to stretch every moment. A memorable wedding for all the wrong reasons.
My cousin had to get married on the beach in Queensland in November and didn't have a rainy day plan. Of course it poured. Wedding still went ahead on the beach. Reception was held at the local football club's upstairs hall. Nothing wrong with that. To save money, but they charged for all of the drinks, including a markup on bottled water. Not enough food, a lolly bar which didn't have enough for all of the guests, a gender reveal cake cut. She was pregnant with her second child, which turned out to be wrong. It was a pink cake, she ended up having another boy, and there were only about a dozen chairs for a wedding with 50-ish guests, so we ended up sitting on the excess gym gear outside. About half the guests had to travel a minimum of an hour plane ride to get there.
Sounds like a typical wedding, honestly. No rainy day plan is always risky, especially in Queensland. Just a lot of small things adding up, like not enough food and that gender reveal cake fail. The venue choices can be a hit or miss, too. Guests flying in for this didn't get the best experience. Guess everyone just rolled with it, sitting on gym gear and all.
Best man, 20-something, was making out with the justice of the peace. She was at least in her 50s, maybe 60s. This was bad enough as is. But the fun really began when the justice's husband came into the reception hall and got a little ticked off. Shoes were thrown, and the best man was chased away by the old man. The marriage lasted about a year. I guess it really was a bad omen.
That's definitely a wild scenario. The whole thing just spiraled out of control. You think you're at a nice wedding, and then bam, drama unfolds. That best man's choice clearly didn't help the couple's luck. It's a strange twist of fate when something like that can set the tone for a marriage. Just shows you that not all weddings end with happily ever after. Sometimes they start with chaos.
It was the wedding for my aunt and her fiancé. Everything was going great until we got to the I do part. When it was my aunt's turn, instead of saying, I do, she yelled, I can't do this, and ran out. That's pretty bad, right? It got worse. As she was running out, her fiancé turned around and yelled, what about the baby? That was how we found out my aunt was pregnant.
That's a wild turn of events. A wedding is supposed to be happy, but that moment must have thrown everyone off. Can't imagine what her fiancé felt like in that situation. Finding out about the pregnancy like that probably shocked everyone. It's definitely not how anyone expects a wedding to go down. I guess it makes for a memorable story, though.
I've been to a few outdoor wedding ceremonies in summer here in Queensland, Australia. It's ridiculously hot and humid in summer, without chairs that just go on and on. All dressed up in your finest, feet going numb in stupid heels. Dripping in sweat for hours is not pleasant. Dear God, peoples, keep it short or give us shade and chairs.
Yeah, outdoor weddings in the summer can be rough. I remember one where it was so hot I thought I might pass out. Wearing those heels didn't help either. Everyone was just standing around, trying to look nice while sweating buckets. I get that they want a nice vibe, but some basic comfort would go a long way. A little shade or seating would really make a difference.
Hubby and I went to his ex-wife's latest wedding at the request of their kids. This was her 4th or 5th wedding with her grown children in attendance. Floor-length white Cinderella wedding dress with everybody in tuxes. From a woman who lived off disability, welfare, and child support. Groom's sister realized bride had been married in this same church before, as she walked through the lobby shortly before the wedding asked, "Come here often?" I nearly wet myself laughing. Photographer wasn't pleased about something, so my hubby and I ended up in a lot of photos. Who doesn't want their ex-husband in their wedding pics? We made sure she changed her name, and the kids were happy. I think the bride and groom ended up cleaning up the rented reception hall themselves because his family was not cooperating. We came home grateful that we'd just run down to the courthouse.
That sounds like quite the scene. Attending your husband's ex's wedding must have been a mix of awkwardness and humor. The joke from the groom's sister seems to have lightened the mood a bit. It's funny how you ended up in so many photos. People will definitely get a kick out of those later. At least you both got to skip the big wedding hassle. Courthouse weddings can feel more straightforward.
It was during the church ceremony, just before the couple exchanged vows, when some guy's cell phone went off with a really pervasive sound. He actually answered the phone and started talking in full voice in the middle of the congregation. The minister stopped the ceremony and asked the guy to please turn off his phone or take the call outside. The guy started yelling back, creating a scene, and was escorted out by the ushers. Although I couldn't see her face, I was told later that the bride was in tears and that it pretty much ruined the ceremony for her. Judging by the look of disbelief in everyone else's faces, I can understand why.
That sounds like a rough scene. Weddings are supposed to be special, and then this guy just completely disrupts everything. It's wild how some people don't know how to act in public. The bride must have felt terrible. I can't imagine how embarrassed the groom felt too. Just a reminder that you never really know how things are going to go in life, even during what should be a perfect moment.
I didn't go to the ceremony, but I went to the reception. It was a Precious Moments themed dry reception, and no one knew it was a dry reception until after they got there. Apparently the bride and groom failed to mention this part. It was tacky and incredibly boring. No one really danced apart from like 4 old people and a couple of kids. The Precious Moments ice sculpture was nearly half melted by the time people started rolling in. It was a disaster. I'd hate to be that couple because everyone probably knows their wedding as the most boring thing they've ever been to. Everyone left early.
That sounds rough. A dry reception without a heads up is a bummer. It's surprising how a theme can go so wrong, especially when the ice sculpture is already melting. Those few people dancing must have made it look even more awkward. I can imagine the couple's probably getting some serious side-eye for it. At least it gave everyone something to talk about later, though I doubt it's what they wanted.
Soon-to-be groom cheats on bride, gets caught. Bride tells groom she'll go through with the wedding if he still wants to. They get married, everyone at the reception is in tears, not an understatement, because of how bad of a move it was on the newlyweds' part. Fights break out between families, more tears, you get the point. Groom is still a serial cheater, and I feel morally obligated to tell the bride, but everyone tells me to keep my nose out of their business. I generally don't, but into anyone's personal life, but during a long talk about how she wished things didn't play out this way, she said, if I ever found out he cheated again, I'd leave in a heartbeat.
That's a tough situation. It's hard to watch someone you care about make a choice that seems so wrong. The bride is clearly in a painful spot, especially if she's already expressed her feelings on trust. You want to be honest, but it feels like you'd be stepping in it if you say something. Balancing friendship and wanting to protect her is tricky. Just hope she figures it out before it gets worse.
Not the wedding, but the reception. Best man's speech starts off boilerplate, talking about the groom being swell. A minute in, it leaves the rails and goes into a 15-minute explanation of best man's alcoholism. Took a 2-minute break to cry, then back at it. Eventually makes it back to how the groom was a good friend in spite of this. Best men of Reddit, keep that speech light, funny, and short. Save your deep talk for your boy for a time when you aren't going to make an entire room feel shitty and take their champagne toast awkwardly. Weddings are a happy day. Your job as best man is to facilitate that as you can.
It's wild how a best man's speech can go off like that. You expect the usual laughs and stories, then bam, it gets heavy. I remember a friend's speech where he almost broke down too. Everyone was just sitting there, unsure if they should laugh or comfort him. Definitely a reminder to keep it lighthearted. Weddings are for joy, not therapy sessions. Just makes you wonder what goes through people's minds.
I went to this wedding a few years ago for a friend of mine. She works with a lot of older people, so the wedding was like 75% late middle-aged people. At the time, I'd just gone through a bad breakup. I knew this wasn't going to be one of those weddings where you meet someone. They go to do the garter toss, and the old fat guy who was the DJ made the call for all the unmarried guys to go up. I walked up and was the only single guy there. So, I was just handed the garter. It was embarrassing. I left shortly after.
That sounds pretty rough. Weddings can be a mixed bag, especially when you're not in a good place. Being the only single guy there must have felt awkward. Getting handed the garter like that after a breakup doesn't help either. Sometimes it's better to just dip out when the vibe isn't right. It's good you recognized that and took care of yourself.
The ceremony and reception totaled 2 hours. They played 3 songs during the reception, one of which was the first dance. No one danced during the other 2. Prior to that, we had to watch the 45-year-old bride give a chair dance to the 50-year-old groom, and the song was Single Ladies. She had props, including a giant cardboard diamond ring.
That sounds awkward. A chair dance to Single Ladies at that age is a bold choice. The props make it even weirder. It's like they wanted to keep it fun, but it probably fell flat. It's one of those moments where you just don't know whether to laugh or cringe. Not the kind of thing you'd expect at a wedding, but I guess everyone's got their unique style.
When I was about 10 or 11, I was a groomsman in my uncle's wedding. It was an outside wedding and about 98 to 102 degrees out. The ceremony lasted about 30 minutes, and I yawned throughout the entire thing, and apparently ruined my aunt and uncle's wedding. I still get shit about it. It's been 7 or so years.
That's a classic moment. Being young and stuck in a hot wedding, it's hard to pay attention. It's funny how that one yawn became a running joke. Family gatherings must bring it up every time, huh? It's interesting how small moments can stick with us and turn into stories we hear for years. At least you have a memorable role in their big day, even if it wasn't intentional.
Wedding itself was fun, but the father of the groom had the worst speech ever. He divorced and remarried, but was sitting between the 2 women and said a joke about how it was easier for God to build a bridge to Hawaii than for a man to understand his wife. And that was his advice to his son. That was pretty darn awkward.
Yeah, that sounds awkward. Wedding speeches can be a mixed bag, and it seems like he missed the mark. Joking about relationships, especially while sitting between both wives, is risky. It's supposed to be a moment of joy, but it can turn cringe real quick. It's hard to recover from a moment like that when everyone's sitting there just trying to enjoy the day.
Uncle and his new wife had a courthouse wedding. Bride called my grandma and said, "Oh, can you buy me some flowers?" Bride wore a wedding dress from 1982 at least. It was far too big for her and was tied in the back with 3 hair ties just to keep it on her. Uncle's dad was late. Missed the whole ceremony. Judge who oversaw the ceremony put my uncle in jail 10 years before for beating his ex-wife. We went to Denny's afterwards. Uncle changed. Bride did not. Bride ate a grand slamwich in her wedding dress.
This story is something else. So, my uncle married his new wife at a courthouse. She called my grandma for flowers, which felt a bit odd. Her wedding dress was way old and held together with hair ties. Uncle's dad missed it all, which was a bummer. The judge had history with my uncle too. After, we hit up Denny's. Uncle was in normal clothes, but the bride stayed all dressed up and was eating a grand slam.
I've been to 3. The first was held in the church gymnasium. No alcohol, paper plates, and plastic forks. The second had no alcohol as well. No DJ or dancing. In the third, the bride and groom arrived so late to the reception that dinner was delayed an hour. No time left for dancing because the bride's family put on these lame skits for about an hour.
Sounds like those weddings were pretty low-key. The first one in a church gymnasium definitely set a casual vibe. No alcohol probably made it feel more family-oriented. The late arrival at the third one must have been frustrating, especially with a delayed dinner. And lame skits instead of dancing? That's a bummer. Guess not every wedding can be a party.
Not me, but my girlfriend's sister used to work at a beautiful and quite fancy restaurant where wedding parties were held every other week. One time, the bride's aunt insisted on bringing all the decoration, and only a couple of hours after the party had started, she just decided to leave and take all the decoration down. Well, everybody saw that as a party is over sign and left. The bride was devastated, and the groom gave everybody who worked that day the fanciest champagne, because they had paid for everything in advance, and there was virtually nobody else left.
That sounds pretty awkward. Just imagine being the bride and having that happen. It's tough when someone doesn't respect the occasion. But at least the groom appreciated the staff. Getting fancy champagne in such a strange situation is kind of a small win for them, I guess. It's wild how one person's actions can change the whole vibe of a day.
Friend's little sister gets married. Their dad is one of the toughest guys I know, and this is his youngest daughter getting married. They pose up for the inevitable garter removal, complete with photographer. Groom looks the father-in-law dead in the eye as he is removing the garter and says, "This is for you, Big Ed. It's all night tonight." The reception basically detonated at that point. Shit was on. My buddy and I tried to stop Ed from beating the groom to within an inch of his life. We were hanging on getting dragged over while the bride is crying, and the groom is too stupid to grab her and make a hasty exit. There was a lot of shouting, I got my suit torn, and the reception ended immediately.
That sounds like a wild wedding. It's always surprising how things can escalate so quickly. The dad's reaction must have been intense, especially with his reputation. I can only imagine the chaos that followed. Everyone just trying to keep things from going too far while the bride is in tears. It's those unexpected moments that make events unforgettable, even if not in the best way. Weddings are definitely unpredictable.
3-hour Catholic trilingual wedding complete with sermon. Sorry, I am not Catholic. Delivered by one trilingual priest. The reception was a blast, but the ceremony felt like you were in Miami International Airport. Each sentence was said in the first language, then repeated in the next, then the next.
That sounds like it was a long day. I can see how a wedding could feel a bit like a marathon, especially with all the language switching. The reception usually makes up for it, though. At least you had a good time afterward. That's what really counts, right?
I attended a wedding that was put on in whole by the bride's mother. She picked literally every aspect of the wedding with complete disregard to the bride or groom's taste. The bride felt helpless to contest since mom was paying for everything and the groom didn't care. During the ceremony, the bride was acting silly, which upset her mother, so her mother told her to cut it out and act her age in front of all their guests. The food was crap. The decor was ugly and gaudy. The bride just spent the reception outside smoking or up in her room getting high. Easily the crappiest wedding I've been to, and the trashiest, even though I'm sure it cost nearly $75,000 for the whole shebang. Proof money doesn't buy class.
That sounds like an awkward situation. It's tough when one person's vision takes over, especially at a big event like a wedding. The bride not enjoying her day is rough, and it really shows how important it is for both people to have a say. Seems like the mother really missed the mark on that one. Sometimes, all the money in the world can't replace what truly matters at these events.
It was BYOM. Bring your own meat to cook on the grill there. Also, when I mentioned that I would bring a pack of hot dogs or something for my family, I was encouraged to bring steak to make the wedding nicer. And if I could bring a family pack because the bride's family couldn't afford to bring their own, that would be great. We missed that one.
That sounds like a weird situation. It's a bit odd to ask someone to bring more just to accommodate the wedding vibe. I get wanting it to be nice, but it shouldn't fall on just one person. Probably could have been handled better. It's a grill, not a charity event. Classic case of expectations versus reality, I guess. At least you didn't show up empty-handed.
Keep in mind I'm happily married, but my wedding sucked. My limo forgot to pick me up, so I finally had to find a taxi and pay $300 for it to bring me, not dressed in wedding gown yet, to ceremony where everyone saw me rushing in sweats. The wedding venue convinced us to do all these really corny ceremony things that I would gag at another wedding couple standing on dance floor while waiters circled us and plates covered with fire, and several another really dorky things. My sister, a bridesmaid, decided to breastfeed the baby as we did the entrance into the dinner. My father broke his foot trying to dance. Picture a 300-pound man with a napkin tied to his head to catch the sweat.
Sounds like a wild ride. Nothing like a wedding day going off the rails. Rushing in like that has to be memorable, though not in the way you want. Those corny traditions can really make you cringe, especially when you're the one at the center of it. And your dad breaking his foot? Man, that adds a whole new level of chaos. At least you've got some stories to tell now.
I hope it didn't turn out to be the worst for others, but I'm not for sure how it turned out. Sister's wedding was at a local church in town, and the ceremony was great. Everything was fine. Only at the end, when the bride and groom were exiting and walking down the aisle, I've been told I slumped into one of the other groomsmen like I just had passed out or something. He at first shook it off as a joke or something and was like, "Yo man, I know it was long, but at least it's time to have some fun." But he eventually knew something was wrong. From what the doctors told me, I was basically dehydrated and a couple muscles above a heart artery collapsed on it. I've been told that I was rushed to the hospital and put in an ice bath, then was put into a medically induced coma. Luckily, I woke up after a day of being in one and got to call my sister before she took off for her honeymoon. Ended up in a hospital for a week so they could put an ICD in. From what I've heard, the reception went okay, and people were able to have fun still.
That sounds like a tough situation. It's wild how things can change in an instant. You go to celebrate a wedding, and it turns into a health scare. At least you woke up in time to catch up with your sister before her honeymoon. The hospital stay must have been rough, but sounds like everyone handled it well. It's good people still had fun despite everything. Glad you're okay now.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.